what sort of security would be out there protecting Zelensky at the moment, and what mechanisms would be being used to keep him safe?
Yeah, so number one, and I don't mean to go down any kind of rabbit hole or movie-esque, but I think his personal location of where he sleeps every night is probably pretty well kept. And I think you have to assume that he moves every, call it 24, 48, 72 hours. I don't believe that anyone would allow him to lay his head down statically every night, night in and night out, because loose lips will get you. And I think that his movement is probably classified to where he sleeps. Do I think that they minimize forecasting when he's going to speak and where he speaks? I think that information is tightly controlled, because you don't want to forecast that too early, because eventually someone will infiltrate, someone will create a threat, and that's a real risk. So you want to protect his schedule. You want to protect where he'll be, when he'll be, so on and so forth. And I think you want to protect where he sleeps at night, because he does need to sleep. He does need to eat. As the symbol and the leader of the country and the very nationalism that they have, he does have to maintain himself for the long haul, because this is not going to be over in a short period of time. He has to be thinking, I have to maintain myself for months to years in this case. So I think all of that is protected. And that's really important. That informational security of his whereabouts is step number one. Number two, you have to assume that he does have an incredibly well-trained, small, for lack of a better term, executive protection or personal security detachment around him. He had that before the conflict. I'm sure it's been increased, if you will. So I think whatever detail he had around him prior to the event, you have to assume that there's now a military element that's a little bit further out. They're doing advances prior to him arriving anywhere, going anywhere to eat or sleep. And I think all of that's just been accentuated, and there's more security. And now his security as the president probably looked kind of like the Secret Service, if you will. Now it looks a little more militaristic. And I think the planning and the preparation is in a much more militaristic fashion than it would have been prior. Lastly, I think that there's got to be a cyber bubble around him. The phones he uses, the computers he uses, all those things that he connects to clearly have to be maintained and monitored in real time, because you don't want that. And how he's communicating matters. How he communicates to other world leaders, what he does online, things like that matter from a cyber perspective. So I'm assuming that's probably been elevated and minimized what systems he's using. I think, from a medical standpoint, the assumption is there is a doctor associated with him or dedicated to him. There's a medical plan. They probably have his blood type ready if he was to be injured, so that if he needed blood, it's right there, it's readily available. I think all of that is just kind of automatic, and it gets accentuated in a combat zone. So I think those are kind of the basic blocking and tackling of what's been increased or changed with him in a combat zone.
Last question, I think. In terms of a leader like Zelensky, how do you keep their mental health in check in such a new situation for them like this?
Yeah. So I watched this in real world example of watching general officers from all over the world, not just the United States, but military general officers in Iraq specifically and Afghanistan. But for me, my personal experience, I was in both conflicts, but Iraq, for whatever reason, I thought was more intense because it was urban, and the amount of attacks, the sheer volume of what was happening, it just felt more visceral. It was much more stressful, I thought, for the general officers that I served with and for. But I watched general officers, some managed themselves incredibly well, others did not. And they tried to be everything to everyone and surge. And if you remember, some of those tours started at 9 months, then went to 12 months, then became 15 months. You started having general officers that were literally deployed at senior levels in combat for 18, 20 months. And again, the ones that would take and ensure they got at least 4, ideally 5 hours of sleep a night, most nights, were much better in enduring this. I think the ones that had people bring them meals and make sure they kept up with their meals and they ate. And lastly, finding, I would say, an hour a week, just an hour a week to reflect, to send a note to your spouse, to talk to your kids. I think with the technology today, people can stay connected in a way we would have never seen in World War II or Vietnam or even the first Gulf War. So I think I watched general officers who stayed connected to their spouse and their kids. And I think that alone has such an incredible, powerful tool for mental health, that when you combine nutrition, and all of them worked out, believe it or not, in the middle of combat, they would take an hour. I watched Petraeus run 12 to 15 miles once, twice a week in the middle of being the combat commander for the main effort of the country in Iraq. So I think that combination of nutrition, taking time to work out and take care of your body, even though you're under enormous amount of duress, and finding a way to find a little bit of personal time to stay connected with someone in your life, that's how these guys maintained it. So I think moving forward, if you take that template with the president of Ukraine currently, I think those are the tendencies that he's going to have to build habit, even though he's got literally the weight of the country on him. If he can build those habits, he'll be able to endure the length of this, if you will.